Hey there, I'm Pete Townsend, and this is Money Never Sleeps. We look inside the minds of entrepreneurs and at the crossover of startups, enterprise, finance, technology, and life as we know it. This week, I'm joined by author Rita Martins as we dive into her new book, Web3 and Financial Services. Rita's book tells a story of how blockchain, digital assets, and crypto are disrupting traditional finance. In an unprecedented time of disruption, Web3 and Financial Services cuts through the noise to ensure financial services professionals are equipped with the knowledge needed to benefit from Web3. Rita Martins is a strategic senior leader with a distinguished track record in financial services, fintech, and Web3. She serves on the advisory boards of a range of startups at the intersection of finance and DeFi, blockchain, digital assets, and crypto, and is a mentor for the Techstars Web3 accelerator. Previously, Rita was the global head of fintech partnerships at HSBC, where she played a key role in incubating and accelerating disruptive technologies, creating significant advancements in the fintech landscape. Her extensive background also includes strategy and digital transformation roles at Accenture and Ernst Young, where she led large-scale digital transformation projects, helping clients achieve strategic milestones. In this episode, Rita and I riff on her inspiration for writing Web3 and financial services and how she tackled the process of writing a book for the first time. We also talk about the key messages that readers will take away from the book and how she aimed to make the content evergreen with a fast pace of change in Web3. Rita was kind enough to feature a contribution from me in the book, so thank you, Rita, for including my thoughts. So let's dive right in with Rita Martins, author of Web3 and Financial Services, all right here on Money Never Sleeps. Rita Martins, great to have you back on the show. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Pete. Good to be here.
Wonderful. And I'm so excited to go a bit deeper into Web3 in financial services with you, your new book. So congratulations on bringing that to the world.
Thank you. Yes, it's super exciting to see the book in paper now. So yeah, very exciting week so far.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to get my copy. I got my Kindle copy already, ready to go, and looking forward to getting the actual hard copy. And so I appreciate that. But listen, we've got a bit of history between us with you being a Techstars mentor, and thank you again for doing that. It's been wonderful to have you part of this program for the last few years. But for our listeners, can you give us some insight into your backstory and how you got to this point, Rita?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I have been a Techstars mentor for a number of years now. So it has been great. It's one of really the great accelerators that I love to meet so many different founders. I started my career at Ernst Young and Accenture. And so I have always been at this bridge between technology and financial services. So any big digital transformation projects, from target operating models to looking into their strategy and saying what are the new technologies that they could leverage and use to get there in the future. And I then moved into HSBC, into the global bank, because I wanted to see how things are really working. I think in consulting, you get this great perspective around the bests and the really ugly part of it. You can see what different banks and financial services are doing, but you don't spend, I think, enough time actually understanding the different systems, the different data, and the complexities of some of the banks. And so working at HSBC, I had that great opportunity to really understand why does it take so long sometimes to drive projects at big banks? What are some of the complexities of managing your business as usual activities, as well as having some new technology coming in and you having to balance both going forward? And so at the bank, I was doing fintech partnerships, and it was really looking into startups and to new technology and seeing which ones we could use at the bank. That's how we met, I think. So I reached out to you and said, well, I'm doing this role, and for me, it's important to know what's out there to keep meeting startups. And so that's how I then started doing some mentoring as well on the side.
And I know that after your first year mentoring or your second year mentoring, Rita, you left HSBC. At a certain point along the way, I kind of got word from you that you were going to write a book. Right?
That's true.
And that, this was when you left HSBC and you started working on some other things. And I know that you started getting kind of more into depth with engaging with founders and perhaps looking at some advisory board positions and things like that, that I'm like, okay, Rita's writing a book. What was the inspiration there? What went through your mind that said, all right, this is going to be a good idea?
Yeah, I think many people were surprised, to be honest. So I was at HSBC at the time for 5 years almost, and I really enjoyed the ride. But as well, like you're saying, I was doing some advisory board positions. I was speaking with startups. And to be honest, I look into this blockchain world back in 2017 when I was at Accenture, because I was working with the finance teams. And you might not be surprised that many of the finance people, they spend a lot of time just doing reconciliation processes.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so for me, hearing about this blockchain technology, a transparent ledger could really eliminate reconciliations. And for me at the time, it was a no-brainer that this technology would disrupt finance. I think at the time it was too early. It was too early for the technology. It was too early for the industry. And so I still kept looking into it personally. And I think in the last few years when I was at HSBC, mentoring at Techstars and looking more and more into this space, I found that now we are at a position where you see institutions really spending time and energy into this. You see the technology has evolved a bit more. You see regulation coming forward. So I think we now are ready to have this disruption within finance. But speaking with people internally at the bank and also speaking externally, I think there is still a bit of a gap in terms of understanding of the technology. We have so many different words and method and key phrases, let's say, that we use within the blockchain technology that other people don't know. And when you look at the news, you also just see this really bad news. You had the FTX collapse that was everywhere when it happened. And you have all the bad actors, all the hacks, all the cybersecurity problems. And so I wanted to write a book that really not only explains a bit what does it mean, what is blockchain, what are some of the use cases, but also that really showcases some of the good parts of it, some of the companies and leaders who are already doing it. So if anyone within a traditional company wants to learn more about it, they have almost like a guide to start with, because it's an evolving, really interesting space, but it can also be challenging if you are starting and you don't even know where do I even start to learn some of the concepts.
I get that. And there's a parallel here between our stories, but had you done much writing before?
So it's interesting. I mean, back in the days, I never did writing and I never thought I would, to be honest. I was not really a writer. But when I was at HSBC, I think around the time of the pandemic, I started writing a bit just because I had all these, I guess, ideas in my mind, and I was having all these discussions which were very similar, and I wanted to do some writing. So I started writing at the time around just really partnerships. So I had a lot of the same questions from startups around how do I approach a bank? Who are the right people to talk at the bank? So I started writing around that. And it has since evolved. So I also have a newsletter around Web3 on Substack called Web3 Crossroads, if anyone wants to come in and have a look at it. So I think more recently I have started doing it, but it was a surprise to me as well, to be honest. It wasn't something that I used to do before. And now I find super interesting in a way that really helps me put my thoughts together, try and really put down some of the trends or some of the insights that I'm seeing, and also help me start some of the discussions. One of the key things of my writing is to let's have a debate about something. Let's really have a conversation around some of the hard topics in this space.
Okay. I get that. I decided to quit my job in 2016 and go down this path of figure out a way to invest in blockchain, right? This was back before Web3 was a term. But back then in 2014, 2015, when I started trying to figure it out, all I had was the Bitcoin white paper. And then thankfully, shortly thereafter, the Ethereum white paper. And imagine the possibilities. And what you're doing is you're saying, listen, let's take everything from the last 10 years and talk to a bunch of people. And like you said, speed this up and accelerate things by writing this book and putting it in front of people who are new to this space, but have some obvious fluency in financial services and say, look at what we could do here. Is that kind of it in a nutshell?
Yeah, for sure. And I think like your way of expressing it was probably through podcast as well, while my way was through writing.
Yeah. And I prefer the podcast and you prefer the writing because,
yes, for sure.
I've done some writing, not book level like you, but some and with the newsletter but I much prefer this medium in terms of the creation. But I think I said this to you before, Rita, like my sister wrote a book. She's a professor of educational psychology. And I saw what that did to her. So I can only imagine. With the book specifically, Web3 and financial services, can you just give us a brief overview of that and the synopsis of it?
Yeah, sure. So the book, it's divided in 4 parts. So the first one is really just an introduction. What is Web3? How does it impact finance? And then the second part, we go through some of the key use cases. So many people, probably your listeners, have heard about tokenization. What is tokenization? What are the benefits and some of the challenges within that space? And then the third part really talks about some of the players. So you have big banks already driving some of the innovation within this space, but also you have new players like DeFi, decentralized finance companies, who might have a slightly different governance. They're governed by a DAO, for example. And as well, the regulator's perspective, which is very different across the globe, and also the investment. And for the investment, I had the pleasure to interview as well and learn about how was the investment landscape change from when you started to when you are now. And that was super interesting. And then the final part of the book is really around the future. So we still need some changes from the technology, from the user experience for this to become mainstream adoption. But if it does, what that could look like. So looking into other emerging markets, for example, and seeing how they are using some of this technology already. It's really, sometimes I joke that it's really like a book. I wish it was there when I started, because it's really a primer for anyone who works in a bank or works within traditional finance, who wants to just learn a bit more about it. What does it mean for them? What could it mean for their job? What could it mean for the business model of the bank?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I wish I had it way back when as well. I mean, I remember going to talk to a couple of people. So with Alan Meany and Des O'Donoghue from Fundrex here in Ireland, and talking to them about blockchain. This would have been back in 2015, 2016.
Early
and
days.
about that exact point, like you mentioned, of reconciliation, because that was their original core investment function that they supported, or investment operations function that they supported, which was reconciliations in the funds industry and for asset managers. And I said, guys, your job's going to be gone. Your software is going to become completely obsolete. And we're still sitting here in 2024, and they're all still they're doing incredibly well with their business with Fundrex. And it will still take time. But I think they went and spoke to someone at Deloitte after me, who then kind of came back and said, guys, it's going to take a while, and I said, yeah, I know it's going to take a while, but you got to just start looking at these things. And I think we now have the benefit of, you mentioned tokenization as being a key part of the book, in that went through a phase already back in 2017, 2018, where everyone was talking about tokenization, and it was this big secret buzzword. And then interoperability came after that, all these other things. But now tokenization has come back into the lexicon of the executives in financial services and in financial services technology. And we're seeing things like the BlackRock US dollar institutional digital liquidity fund, right? That is a tokenized money market fund effectively. And it's not quite at the races yet in terms of complete DeFi fluency and usability across all of the different crypto markets, but it's a big, big step. And Franklin Templeton had one as well, and they still do. And I think Fidelity, I just saw some news the other day that their team went up. So this is very real. And some of these first steps that we saw back in 2017, 2018, it just feels different this time. I think it is. But with some of the key messages that are part of your book here, and that it's right there in the tagline underneath the title, is that blockchain, digital assets, and crypto disrupting traditional finance. What are some of the key messages that you would like readers to take away from this? I'm drawing some of my own inferences, but what would you like readers to take away from this?
Nowadays, there are so many different technologies, right? I mean, AI, just everywhere, everyone is talking about AI. So if you are working, for example, at a traditional finance company, you might be wondering, why should I even look at blockchain technology? Blockchain technology has been here since, I mean, you were looking at it since 2014. So it's been a long time, and some of them haven't really seen any big changes. But the reality is that the technology has been evolving, has been changing, and it's now really being adopted by some of the big players within financial services, which will bring some of the liquidity that we might have been lacking before. And so for any leaders within traditional finance who might be wondering, why should I pay attention to these? The reality is that if you don't pay attention, you might be disrupted by some of these big companies. And so that's one of the key messages of the book is, look, it's almost like a back-end technology. I compare it sometimes to clouds. And so it takes a long time. It's also super disruptive technology because the ecosystem came as almost disrupting some of the social norms, some of the even what we think of money. It even questioned, do we even need central banks? So it started with this really big vision, and I think it has evolved since, and that's why it's taking so long, because it touches money, it touches central banks, it touches some of the traditional governance models. So it's a really big ask, and that's why it's taking a long time, and it will take a long time. But if we are not ready as traditional finance leaders, you might get disrupted very quickly when other companies are really adopting some of the technology and they're going for it. So that's one of the key messages of the book, is that it is coming, and some of the big companies are really going for it now. They're really implementing some of the big solutions. And these are just building blocks, as I like to call it. So you mentioned Franklin Templeton, for example. They have their tokenized funds, and they recently, I don't know if you saw, they also just enabling USDC, the stable coin, on their tokenized funds. So until recently, crypto people could only use fiat currency. And now we say, okay, we have tokenization as a use case, but also we have new payment forms as on top of the tokenization use case. And I think this is when everyone is going to start seeing a big impact here, is when you start seeing some of these solutions with different building blocks coming together, and the ecosystem really start having some of the liquidity. And the other key, let's say, message of the book is that these both worlds, the DeFi world and the traditional fi worlds, they're going to converge together. And eventually you're going to have so many new solutions that as a end user or as a client, you're not even going to know if using blockchain or not, because it's going to be super seamless. And it's just going to be another component as part of financial services.
Yeah, it's maddening, but in a good way. And there was this episode of Seinfeld back in the 90s, and I'm dating myself here, but George Costanza, one of the characters on the book, that he was worried about his social life with his friends and his life with his new girlfriend were starting to come together, and that his friends were hanging out with his girlfriend and having a good time. He's like, no, my worlds are colliding. My worlds are colliding. And for so long that there had been this separation of those that were kind of, seems like part of, I wouldn't call it a crowd, but at least in my professional community, it seems like there was this financial services crowd and they did their own thing. And there was this blockchain crypto crowd and they kind of did their own thing. And now the worlds are colliding. They have collided. It's just, where are we in that Venn diagram, really, of these two globes colliding? And it's, I think you nailed it when you said the word liquidity, because there's so much new liquidity coming into the crypto markets now, with this ability to transfer between, like you said, USDC, so from fiat currency into USDC, into stable coins, and then from there into the broader crypto asset market. And one of the other Techstars mentors, Gray Webb, shout out to Gray, he's the COO and CTO of a fund called Liquibit. And they just opened up a BTC share class. And so that they had been running a market neutral arbitrage fund in crypto. And now they are enabling those that are long-term holders of Bitcoin to be able to subscribe to the fund and invest in the fund using BTC, and then basically generating returns on top of that for whatever they hold long-term. So there's plenty happening here. And it's fantastic that you're pulling all this together into a book to put in front of the crowd that we need to really bring further along on this journey, don't we?
Yeah, for sure. You can see this convergence as well by the talent that you have in it. So both of us, we came from traditional backgrounds, and we're now within the blockchain world, let's say. And I have met so many people as part of the book research and conversations I had for the book that you can really see the talents from people who were part of the traditional finance, who have really tried and tested, who have seen things that work and don't work, coming and using some of the blockchain technology. And you have seen as well from the other side, people that started probably from this blockchain vision without having too much financial background, now starting to learn much more about regulation. What does it mean if MiCA comes through, and eventually, let's say, the European regulators start looking into DeFi and they start really regulating DeFi part of it. So you see a lot of this talent as well merging and learning from each other, which is super interesting.
Definitely. With the book itself, how long did it take you to write it?
It took me 6 months to write full time. But then after that, you have, of course, the back and forth and try and update something last minute, because this ecosystem is always changing all the time. So it took me 6 months full time to really write it.
Okay. And was there a particular part of it that you think was the most challenging?
Every time I started a new chapter, that was the most challenging, because you're starting from a blank piece of paper. And that was super interesting, learning around how do you find a book, how do you write it, and how do you get the motivation to write. There were some chapters that I found much more fun to write, like the future. And there were others like payments, for example, which, to be honest, it was much more challenging just because it's quite a dry topic and you want to try and make it much more interesting for people to learn about it, because payments is a key part of this. But how do you make it interesting enough for people to learn about it? So some more interesting than others as well, some more favorite than others.
Well, I like how you weaved in the narratives, and very much like Michael Lewis, one of my favorite writers. And that's what makes his, obviously, nonfiction, most of what he writes is nonfiction, very interesting. And so, I really like how you did that in terms of getting those narratives from different folks out there. And what was that process like, that outreach, that research, to be able to say, does this person have something interesting to contribute to the story that the readers will find interesting as well?
Yeah, so some people I ask recommendations. I said I'm looking for this type of people. And the other ones was really around things that are available online. So for example, Project Guardian, it's one which is super available online. I find it fascinating because it's bringing JP Morgan, a traditional bank, and they used a public blockchain, which is something that you don't see many banks doing. And so, for example, I try to really get someone from Project Guardian to talk about it. So it was a combination of finding projects or news that were available that I found interesting and try to get someone that work in those projects, or also as well from introductions or asking for people to say, who do you think I should talk to? And yeah, I mean, I had the opportunity to interview so many interesting people. To be honest, it was a pleasure. And I'm really thankful for everyone who took their time to even tell me about their story, tell me about what they have learned and some of the questions they still have.
Yeah, absolutely. And after I reread the part that I contributed, Rita, I kind of went back and a bit cringe, like, oh God, is this like now outdated because the whole crypto landscape, digital assets, is moving so quickly, right? And so was in terms of what people were contributing and some of your own thoughts and things that you developed your own thesis on where we're headed, that was there a fact-checking process that you had to go through, and what's that like? Because when I do some of my newsletter writing, I do spend quite a lot of time. If I think I have an idea about something that I heard before, I'll then spend Google time looking to make sure. But you've got a combination of your own ideas, these interviews that you did with people, and to contribute their thoughts. How did you go back and say, well, do I want to make sure that I want to share all of this with the world in this book that you published?
Yes, and books are very different from newsletters as well, because they need to have all the references. So when you write a book, you need to make sure that everything is referenced. And a big part of it was really, like you're saying, is this right? I think this ecosystem is still evolving so much, and different people have different views on what's happening and how the future is going to be. And so I always had that question around me, like, is this correct? Like, are people going to be challenging me? And to be honest, they probably will challenge me, and I really hope that they do, because it means they'll be learning and we'll be having those conversations. Many of the stories that are included within the book, I researched them and made sure that I had different sources as well. So in the book, you have a reference of one newspaper or one magazine, but I have looked into a few different ones to make sure that they all said the same thing. And it's a hard one because, like you're saying, I mean, it's evolving all the time. But I think what's important here is that for people to understand the backgrounds. Because if you don't know, like all the story, for example, around the ICOs, you don't really understand how it is evolving nowadays and some of the considerations that companies have nowadays. So I think it's still important, even if maybe outdated some of the stories or some of the examples, it's important for people to understand the evolution, and they will get a better understanding of why we're doing what we're doing nowadays. Why is it that you as an investor, for example, might be looking into slightly different skills or slightly different areas when you're looking for a founder or a new startup? Why is it that nowadays investors may be looking much more from an equity and not so much from a token, which initially everyone had a token and we saw what that led to. So I think it's important as well to have some of the history and some of the background. And then, yes, I mean, of course, this is just a starting point. And the problem of writing a book within this space is that it's always evolving. And I mentioned, for example, the Bitcoin ETF at the time I was writing the book, because it's such an important part of this ecosystem. And it was this year that finally it was approved. And I messaged my publisher saying, look, can I still change it? And just update it saying that it was approved, because it was still written as we're waiting for an update from the SEC. And luckily I was able to change that. So big things like those, I was able to change them last minute. But of course, there are so many news stories already, which I hoped I could have added to the book, but of course they're happening now as well. So it's hopefully still really interesting for people to understand what has been happening in the last few years.
Oh, wow. That sounds so hard, because for podcasting, right? Twice now had conversations with Alejandro Gutierrez on the day that ETFs were approved. First the Bitcoin ETF and then the Ethereum ETF, even though it was only phase one of the approval. But all I had to do was go back later on, record one more snippet, and then drop it into the podcast and say, hey, listen, everybody, this was approved. And we were talking about how it probably would be, and we were right. So it's like,
yeah.
But you actually have to ask a publisher to say, can I make this one change?
Yeah, exactly. Because you have a whole process, right? So after you finish publishing and so on, they have to do all their internal processes. So it's not just a change. Funny enough, I didn't listen to your Ethereum one, but I listened to your Bitcoin one. And I remember you were not the only one. There was a few podcasts that they had that disclaimer on them saying this was approved but it was recorded before it was approved. So just keep that in mind, which is just to show you how this year it's really changing. We have seen so many changes that we have been waiting for so long. And this year really seems that we are really seeing big value and big changes, some from political perspective, some just because companies have been building for so long that they are now ready. So it's also exciting.
Oh, yeah, it is. And, people talk about the killer app. And if you think about AI, that ChatGPT has obviously been the killer app that's come out in the last couple of years that has fast forwarded that. And I've been thinking about crypto and the killer app. Lots of folks will talk about stablecoins as being the killer app for that. When you talk to people and get some toxicity back from them about crypto, when they think that you're referring to a currency that you want to change how they are paid, like, no, we're not doing that. That when you talk to them about stablecoins, they just don't. They'd never heard of them. They weren't even aware that they existed. And it's something a lot easier for people to get across the bridge on when it comes to crypto. But I'm thinking of, and will stablecoins be the killer app? Hopefully, perhaps, I don't know. But lately it seems like the killer app is politics. Like you said, that, okay, Trump kind of seeing that Biden is or was anti-crypto, and then him saying crypto is good for him, and then Biden reacting and saying, well, I might lose some votes from this. So Chair Gensler, can you please move forward with the ETH ETF approval? Now, allegedly, I don't know if that actually happened, right? But you got to expect there was some politics involved there, but then kind of Biden throwing a spanner into the works and not approving SAB 121 overrule and overturning. So there's definitely something going on there that is putting it back into the media spotlight, and the Stand with Crypto push that Coinbase has been on, the Fair Shake super PAC that is now 25, 50, 100 million in contributions, that this is gaining momentum, and that whether politics is the killer app for crypto or not, I don't know, but I certainly welcome it because it's helping, and it's helping the founders that I invest in to get more interest as well, beyond the very small ecosystem that is those that are investing early stage into Web3. And did you identify what you think might be a killer app, or is that something you've thought much about?
I don't know if we have that yet. I think we had some defining moments. So similar, you were mentioning the stablecoin. I think the Libra project was one key moment. Until then, no one knew about stablecoins. You didn't have central banks or governments looking into it. And because of the power of Facebook, that really made some central banks saying, well, wait a second, this is not going away. There are some real use cases here. And so we need to have an alternative. And we don't know the real reasons why Libra eventually was closed down, but the reality is that it really changed some of the CBDC discussion for many central banks. So I think that one was one of the big moments within this ecosystem. And I think we'll see what happens with US elections. It could also be another big moment. It definitely has already changed some of the existing conversations. And I have been speaking with many companies recently. They are based in the US, and I have been asking them, what is the feeling? Do you think if Trump does get elected that we might see a change? Would that be good? And many of them definitely think that could be one of the big changes that we might see going forward. So it's interesting, that this is a global ecosystem. However, US still plays such a massive impact into it. You still have so many companies who have been waiting for so long on the regulation in the US to change because of just the market opportunity you have in the US. And so if Trump does get elected and if the regulation framework in the US changes, I think there will be another big enabler for companies who are building and, like you're saying, who are looking for investment, and that will trickle down to the rest of the world for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard someone comment on this recently, that if you see Trump getting a bit riled up about something and being all anti this or anti that or pro this or pro that. And it could create some political kerfuffling that all you need to do is walk into his office and say, Mr. Trump, you're looking very handsome today. Could we probably just move on from this topic? And he'll, oh, thank you. And he'll completely forget about what you were just talking about that might be, anti or pro or whatever that is, Rita. Okay.
I was going to say I'll keep that in mind for when I meet Trump, but
there you go. There you go. But if you mentioned Libra, and that if you had written this book a few years ago, that perhaps Libra might have been pointed to as something that would be, like we talked about, the killer app. And then a year later, it would have been immediately outdated. And that I think with a book like this, I'd expect you'd want to be able to write it from the perspective of where there was some evergreen nature to the book, that it's something that could be relied upon as a resource for years rather than months. Were there anything you decided not to do a deep dive into in the book in expectation that it might be too trendy or buzzy, that in order to keep this to be more of an evergreen resource for people?
Yeah, so there are a few topics that I don't really touch as much, like the NFTs and the metaverse, which sometimes you include into the Web3 world. I think they were more like a gamification, let's say, which they created some buzz, they created maybe some good excitement, some investment. But I think there were short-term initiatives. They were just trying to hype some of the conversation. And so when I wrote the book, I really want to talk about things that for me, as probably a professional person from financial services, how would it really impact my work? Something that I see much more as a long-term impact to the industry and less as gamification or hype that you see in the news. So yes, I didn't cover some of those topics.
Okay, good call. Yeah, and that when I talk about Web3 to people, sometimes they think I'm referring to that end of Web3, which is the NFT side, the Bored Ape Yacht Club, CryptoPunks, everything that went along with the 21, 22 buzz around metaverse. And I'm like, no, it's the building of the decentralized internet and on-chain value transfer, or completely digital value transfer. And that opens up people's minds a bit. When I did the demo day back in June 6th in New York City, I knew we'd get some reactions based upon the companies that were demoing, or the companies that were pitching that day, on where's the Web3 in this? And it's like, exactly. If that's your reaction, that's what I want. We're a couple years ahead of the thinking on everybody else with this stuff. So if you're saying, where's Web3 in this? That's wonderful, because we just, for some of this, especially on the consumerization of blockchain, I just want it behind the scenes and for people not to think about it. With some of the reactions that you got on this book, friends, family, people in your network, I saw, for example, your thank you to Mike Soterakos, who's also a Techstars mentor for us, and that he reviewed a few chapters for you, and definitely a big shout out to Mike. What was his reaction? What were some of the reactions from others when you let them know that you were going down this path?
Yeah, so Mike, and just maybe a background on Mike. So Mike is a multi-time founder. He worked at HSBC at the time that I was there. He was one of our entrepreneur residents within the Web3 space. And so when I thought about doing the book, I, of course, told him, and I wanted to get some initial feedback around, is it a good idea? Is it something that people would want within the market? And Mike has been super supportive since the beginning. And given his knowledge, of course, I wanted to make sure that he could review some of the chapters, and he had very kindly reviewed the chapters. I think the feedback has been one of a surprise that I'm even writing a book. And then the second one is curiosity. It's interesting that so many people have heard about blockchain, have heard about Web3, even if they do not work within finance, even if they do not work within technology, but they still don't understand what it is. So I got many people saying, well, I definitely want to read your book because I'm curious about it. I was at some drinks during the weekend, meeting some people. One of them was working at Amazon. The other one was working at an investment bank. When I said that I was writing a book on Web3, they immediately start asking me, okay, but I heard about blockchain, what it is actually, what does it mean? Why do we even need a new form of money? Is that not why we have central banks? And so I have had a lot of these different feedback of people really getting curious about this space. And it does show that there is definitely appetite for it. And we have seen even with, I think was Coinbase when they had their advertisement with the QR code that it went down because so many people tried and log into the QR code. So there is definitely some appetite and there is definitely some curiosity within this space. And I was super surprised to get such a positive feedback from the book and from the fact that now you have some source there that people can go and read and learn a bit more about.
Definitely. And have in terms of the reader feedback, have you gotten some early feedback? I know that it was just published back on June 3rd, but anything coming back to you yet from readers that you'd never been in contact with before?
So I haven't had anyone's is still super new and it's coming out, but I'll let you know when I get some interesting feedback. I'll let you know what's the challenges has been. I think that's going to be the interesting part.
Definitely. And in terms of this whole process, how do you feel now that this is out there in the world and finished?
Well, so now there is a whole part of marketing and telling people about the book. It's interesting because I thought naively probably that after you write the book, that's it. The book is out there. But you have to do the whole process of going to conferences, coming to podcasts like yours, like this one, and just telling people that the book is out, where they can buy it, what is the book about. So there is still a lot of work that is being done, but I feel super proud that yes, the book is out there now, and I'm proud of actually having done these projects, and hopefully people will find it interesting.
Oh yeah, it's a huge commitment. Like I said, my sister told me all about it, so I can definitely, I get it. And you should be very proud. And it's a huge undertaking to do something like this in such a fast changing, fast moving space.
Yeah. Thank you. I remember you telling me about your sister actually before I even thought about the book, and I remember thinking, wow, that's a lot of work. And still, I was surprised when writing it how much work it is. But yeah, good for your sister.
Absolutely. In terms of, you mentioned obviously being on this podcast, but also then thinking about other things that you're going to be doing to promote the book. Any big book tour, book signing coming up? Anything like that you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm actually, this evening, I'm doing a big book signing in London. And then at the end of June, I'm doing an event with Ripple, which was also one of the companies who was interviewed for the book. So I'm doing their summer party with them. If you're in London, please let me know. You can come and join us.
Wonderful.
And then I will probably do a few more podcasts over the summer and then do much more, again, back to the events in September, because I know some people will probably be taking some time off during July and August, and then we'll be back in September.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. We told all of the founders from Techstars that, listen, if you're not opening your round already, wait until September, because there's just going to be no one around for the summer. There never is. Depending upon the country in which the investors live, it could be a little bit longer for some versus shorter for others.
Yeah, especially Europe, they'll go on holidays in August, so do not message them.
I remember back in my BNP Paribas days, if there were meetings in Paris during August, there was nowhere to get lunch because the canteen was closed. Like the canteen closed for August.
Wow.
It like
the whole month?
The whole month.
Wow.
So obviously you could go out and get a baguette somewhere, as you do, but it was, so that was shocking, but it's a good way to live, just prioritize that. And over the 2 weeks holidays that everybody gets, or 2 weeks vacation that everybody gets in the US, with that being their allotment for the year. But listen, Rita, I'm going to ask you the question that I ask everybody that I interview on this podcast to round things out. What is one thing that people would not expect to know about you?
Well, so one of them we just talked about, which is really writing the book. The second one is probably that I lived in Africa for 2 years when I was working in consulting.
Wow. Where in Africa?
In Angola.
Wow. How was that?
Yes. I mean, it was super interesting. I was working in a confidential project, but it was with the government. And it's a very different type of lifestyle, but it is also very different working. I learned so much, to be honest, around like how does the financial system work? How does a very different country works? And when people tell me about the example of mobiles in Africa, it's something that I really see, because it's no one in there had the conditions that we have here, but everyone had a phone, even if a very simple phone. And I definitely saw some of that. It was a super interesting experience. And I think it really helped me from a professional side, but also from a personal side of just living in a very different country where people live very different conditions that have different struggles. And that really makes you really be thankful for some of the things that you have. Some big parts of being who we are is just being lucky of where we even born.
Totally. I know. And that's lyrics from a U2 song on where you're born should not decide whether you live or whether you die. You know, and that, yeah, so true. On the lighter side, me in Paris worried that I wasn't going to be able to get my lunch and I could run outside and get a baguette on a day trip or a 2 or 3 day trip. What was it like nourishing yourself, just getting used to the local cuisine?
It's interesting. So we had a whole project team, right? So we had specific, it's almost like any expat living, I guess. Like you go to specific locations. You try at least not to eat in some of the more local parts of it because you are not used to it. That is reality. But to be honest, even just going to some of those much more expat restaurants and so on, it was always very interesting because the food, it's super tasty, but it's also very different than what I was used to in Portugal. And so you just, you get used to different cuisine, to different lifestyles, and to even just different way of communicating with people.
Absolutely. And well, what I'm hoping is that with the new lifestyle that this book hopefully affords for you, Rita, that perhaps it will become an international food traveler reviewer and that you can go to all of these different places and come back with these stories about, yes, this is how to live and adjust in a new country and get used to the cuisine and make the most of it. So maybe that's something that's with book 2, you could come back with that.
Yes, book 2. Maybe when I forget about this one, I'll go into that one.
Awesome. And where can people get the book?
So the book is available online on Amazon or Kogan page, and it's also available on your local bookstores. It's available worldwide.
Wonderful. All right. And really looking forward to hearing about everything that's going to happen with the successes on this, Rita. So thank you for coming on to the show and telling your story and telling the story about Web3 and financial services. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.
That does it for this week, folks. Thanks to Rita Martins, author of Web3 and Financial Services, for opening up her mind to help me figure out why she does what she does. For show notes, resources, and links to her book on Amazon and Kogan page, check out our website, moneyneversleeps.ie. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as it helps others to find the show. Also, thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for mixing and editing this episode. Conan is an excellent media man to get in touch with when you're thinking about launching your own podcast. As for me, I'm an early-stage startup investor focused on where fintech meets crypto and crypto meets Web3, and I lead the Techstars Web3 accelerator. There are plenty of links in the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie on how to get in touch with us, so don't hesitate to reach out. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!
Money never sleeps, pal.